Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you very much. Oh, I'm glad you made it. Okay. Got out of the house, did you? Okay. Mark, get back on track. We have a very interesting meeting. What's happening in Texas and how we can not turn into what's going on in California. So, with all that doing, please stand and let's have Mike Vance, Deputy Mike Vance, you want to come up, sir, and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Would folks join us please for our nation's flag? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now to the flag of the United States of the Union, Texas.
I pledge this flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Please remain standing. And David, you want to come forward, sir, and lead us in the invitation?
Dear Lord God, thank you for this wonderful day that we can gather as friends and brothers and sisters to unite in fellowship, to enjoy each other's company, and to study and learn about politics and about our role in our society, what we can do to sustain and improve it. Ask that you would honor our time, bless our time. May it help all of us to flourish even more than we already are. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Have a seat. Now, where's our technician? Delar, who are we?
Well, who are we?
Who are we?
Not the Tea Party.
Yeah, we're not the Tea Party. Hold on a second, I've got to find my mouse here.
All right.
Whoops, that's the wrong one. This one over here.
There we go. Who are we? The Traditional Republican Men's Club. This is our 52nd year. All right. And it's where men and women join together, learn together, and work together. Now, we're the traditional. Whose phone was it? Didn't you get your phone? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm a senior citizen. All right. Where we work together for the Collin County Republican Party. Now, again, we're not the ultra conservative. We're the mainstream Republican Party, and I welcome you to become a member and get active. I'm going to do a little bit, go to the legislature part where I want to make a very important point on all of our representatives.
You didn't tell me about that, so we have to.
Well, I say back up, I'm going to do this. We'll go ahead and do this before we do our speaker. All right.
This one?
Yeah, on our program. I wanted everybody to go to the legislature website and
You
do,
can find a link to it. I don't know how quick we can get there.
okay,
Bottom of ours.
all right. But I always say this, but your representative, Jeff Leach, Matt Shaheen, Scott Sanford, Candy Noble, okay, go to the website at the state legislature.
It's going to keep.
Let's see what bills they're working on. See which bills they're co-sponsoring.
It's at the wrong place.
Okay.
But they're not solving the tax reform issue.
Well, you're right on target, but how do you know what's going on in your legislature and see how effective they are? And the best way is to go to the website. There we go. I don't want to pick on any particular one, but go to Candy Noble if you could pull it up. And I'll pull up any.
Members.
Go to Candy Noble. There's Noble. Pull up Noble.
There we go. And then. There we go.
All right. Now, I want to share this with you, but Jody Lightenberg's administrative assistant, somebody help me, Suzanne? Huh? Susan?
Suzanne,
What's her last name? I can look it up on my computer. Anyway, it's her administrative assistant. The report come back on Candy Noble, and this is her first term, is excellent. They say she's an excellent learner, and she listens, and she's getting some great points from her other representatives. But most importantly, you should know who your representative is, and you should have an interaction with that person on what they're working on and what's going on. It's their website. So you simply go and review. You can go and see here. Here's the bills that they authored, co-authored, sponsored. So, and you can read the bill, actually the written narrative, if you just follow through on the program. All right, let's move on here. We have a very interesting speaker this evening. A young man that formed a company after 2 terms in the Marines and a think tank, and whether it is social issues or political issues or economic issues, they have done some remarkable research, and they have suggestions. And are you pulling up Michael Wood now, or?
Trying to, are we done with this completely? Should we shut it down?
If we can, if we can actually hear. Michael Wood, all right, and 2 terms in Marines, I believe it was.
2 deployments. Yeah.
Okay, so our theme tonight is the Lone Star. Their think tank that they formed is Lone Star Policy Institute, and so Mr. Wood, if you'll come up and tell us how we can safeguard our heritage and culture in Texas. Okay. Y'all welcome him?
Well, thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me to speak. It's a privilege to be here tonight. A little bit about LSPI. About a year and a half ago, some friends and I talking about the changing nature of Texas and how Texas is going through all sorts of different things right now, and we wanted to really be a part of that conversation. There's nothing written in heaven or anywhere else that Texas will stay the great conservative state that it's been my entire lifetime. And we wanted to form a think tank that could really meet some of the issues that are affecting Texans today. So what does that mean? For the most part, we focus on urban issues and issues facing Texas, the biggest cities within Texas. A lot of people don't realize, especially outside of the state, that about 80% of our population lives in the triangle formed by Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. We're an increasingly urbanized state, and conservatives can no longer have the opportunity to sort of run up the margins in rural parts of our state to sort of offset some of our losses in the big city. So that's what LSPI is focused on, and I think that's germane to what I'm going to talk about tonight. So 231 state agencies, 28 titles of administrative code, 28,000 pages of regulation. That's California today, and those numbers aren't going down. The Golden State has given us many incredible things like Ronald Reagan, the iPhone, Disneyland, but the latest contributions seem to be somewhat less useful. There's Nancy Pelosi, homeless epidemics, and most notably for Texans, thousands of young idealists relocating to our Lone Star State. But what happens when enough Californians or other immigrants and overschooled but perhaps undereducated millennials decide to make Texas their home? They're likely to vote for the same policies that destroyed their homes in the first place. Texas right now has 126 state agencies, 16 titles of administrative code, and about 44,000 individual regulatory rules, some of which can change daily. It's well on its way, if we're not active and engaged, to becoming an overactive micromanager if wrong policies are implemented. And it's our job as conservatives to uphold the tradition of limited government and the spirit of individualism in Texas to combat such Californization. I think the best way to keep Texas on track is to keep our eyes wide open about what's going on in other parts of the country and pay particular attention to who's moving in. California is important for 2 reasons. First, it's a sister state to us in a whole lot of respects. We have a lot of similarities in demographics and natural resources, and we're comparably sized, so we can appreciate the nature of governing so many people in such a dynamic economy. Second is that, as I'm sure many of you know, many of our new residents come from California. That means that California is uniquely important because we need to know who's coming, what their views and values are, and perhaps most critically, why they left California in the first place. So I'm going to give a brief overview of California and Texas, and then we'll look specifically at Texas and what it'll take to preserve the Lone Star State. I want to recognize that California has a lot of great things to offer. I'm proud that California is a part of our country. really easy to beat up on places like San Francisco and LA, but I mean, I will say that I think that our country would be a poorer place if those cities weren't a part of it. There's nothing wrong with recognizing that. The state's a valuable member of our federal republic, but it's increasingly taking steps that diminish freedom and prosperity. It's not a wasteland or barren or anything like that. On the contrary, California is uniquely beautiful, has a robust economy, and contributes greatly to the American experiment in federalism, albeit oftentimes by proving what doesn't work. Historically, each state, Texas and California, has had eras as independent republics. Granted, Texas was a full-fledged nation, while California was more of a weeks-long temper tantrum, but we'll let them have it. Each state saw major political shifts towards the end of the last century, flipping from reliably red, the state of Reagan, to blue in California, and from blue, the state of, I don't know, Lloyd Bentsen or early John Connolly, to red in Texas. Each state has dense urban centers and great demographic diversity. Both host growing minority populations and are on their way to becoming minority-majority states. And they share a border with Mexico, have expansive coastlines, and abundant natural resources. Even while having the upper hand in many things, some things that we do in Texas may take some rethinking. Texas has, hands down, the better tax climate, but there are lessons learned from California and maybe even ideas to borrow. Other policies simply need to be maintained and protected against do-gooder idealists voting on emotion. Our liberal energy policy, decentralized regulatory framework, are the Texas version of self-evident truths that we hope all people will know and understand, and don't seek to meddle with. It's instructive to look over an array of policy areas in California and Texas to keep us on the right path. So I'm going to talk about real quick taxes, fiscal policies, energy and regulatory rules, housing and urban development, and the political culture of freedom. Texas is superior in everything that I just mentioned, but we can nevertheless notice some areas of slippage that need work. So let's start with what we do well. Texas doesn't have an income tax. Texas consistently ranks among the best in the nation for fiscal health and freedom. Part of that is due to a favorable tax policy, with the best of them being that we don't have an income tax. That's one of those things that we should absolutely never change. The income tax is a gross perversion of the relationship between the citizens and the states, and it distorts labor markets and depresses economic activity. The state needs money, but there are other ways to craft taxes that are more efficient and less philosophically backwards. We're on the opposite ends of the spectrum with California on this one, because they have the highest income tax of any state. High income taxes complicates other matters like housing affordability and economic activity. And when the state takes part of what you earn, there's less to use for rent, food, and whatever else you want to spend it on. Even though tax reform and changes may be warranted in Texas, income tax should always be a non-starter. When it comes to energy, phrases like drill, baby, drill, and all of the above come to mind, and Texas lives those to great effect. We have incredible wealth in natural resources and access to offshore resources as well. We're the leader in petroleum and fossil fuel exploration and generation, but we also consistently lead in wind power and other green sources. And a lot of this success comes from deregulatory electricity markets and the competition that we've done over the past few decades. Texas also is uniquely positioned with its own energy grid entirely to itself. In this state, we allow and encourage innovation, competition, and access to all forms of energy. California, exact opposite. Restrict energy options there, including offshore drilling and really a whole lot of private competition. California also makes climate a centerpiece of their energy policy. They have climate goals and benchmarks to reach, which necessarily means relying on more expensive and less efficient energy sources. Doesn't have much of an impact on the climate, but it will decrease and has decreased prosperity for their citizens. Texas can't afford to take this type of attitude. We should, of course, be good stewards of our environment, but cheap and abundant resources help advance human flourishing, and that's critical. The best way to help out the global community is through leading the charge in innovation, competition, and energy production. All right, so some things to keep an eye on. Urban policy. Some people have resigned the large cities to be just liberal or progressive havens. And I think a lot of conservatives, even within Texas, have sort of taken that mindset. Conservatives often believe that rural areas are kinfolk, that suburbs are up for grabs, and that cities are lost causes. I think this is a defeatist attitude that shows that we might lack the confidence in what we preach. We know that our policies work, so why give up on implementing them where most people live? In cities, this means allowing local control at the lowest levels rather than centralizing rulemaking. It means fiscal conservatism, free markets, and low taxes. It also means no market interference like minimum wages or rent controls. These are the bread and butter of progressive ideologues, and they never fail to disappoint. Texas has highly functional urban centers, in a lot of ways actually, at least relative to places like San Francisco. We have homelessness, but not at epidemic proportions. We have transportation issues, but no over-budgeted and behind-schedule high-speed rail project abandoned a few weeks ago without completion, as in California. The main problem in Texas is a failure to engage in cities. We need to keep an eye on this policy trend, on this policy area, not because it's trending badly, but because we haven't had our eye on it in the first place. Moreover, and I'm sure you might want to talk about this, to the limited extent that we do look at cities, we have a tendency, I think, to look at it in a backwards way. Rather than promote good conservative urban policy and being part of that debate, we often see our legislature prohibiting localities from doing certain things. Which brings us to the interesting dynamic of preemption in Texas. It's using the state government to force or prohibit things on the grounds of good policies. Even if they are good policies, this is a subtle precedent for controlling and limiting freedom. Ideally, we would have decentralized control where individuals get the most say in what they do, how they spend their money, and what activities they enjoy. Governing from the lowest level possible helps ensure this, but sometimes lower levels of government make bad choices, like instituting minimum wage laws or rent controls. I think Dallas had a paid sick leave thing a few weeks ago, last week. We obviously want to avoid these policies, and we know they're proven to be inefficient, illiberal, and damaging. But I think we should be careful about preempting local ability to set policies that people want. State-level policies is not always desirable. Perhaps we should let Austin be Austin and let Lubbock be Lubbock. California has over 200 state agencies hell-bent on setting standards and rules across their entire complex, diverse state. That should not be the path the Texas legislature takes, nor the Texas state agencies. And I think part of the way to circumvent the lure of preemption is to be active as individuals in small groups like this. There's a long and unique history of individualism combined with community in Texas. I think that we've actually seen an example with the charitable efforts of this organization tonight. California, especially lately, has looked to government to solve problems and pass the buck up the ladder to other people. The best way for Texans to avoid a bad local policy or even bad state policy is to be active in their communities, creating economic opportunity. Affordable living. Now, if you take a look at the cost of living differences in California and Texas, no income tax, Texans have more money at their control. With liberal energy policy, Texans have cheap energy. With so much land, Texans have affordable places to live. But as our populations in our cities grow, housing and other affordability concerns continue to grow as well. This is another issue that we need to keep an eye on. We should reject the way California seeks to achieve affordable housing by letting markets be free. The last thing Texans do well, but need to stay on top of, is our political culture of freedom. Some of you may think that this is one of our best features, but if you look at recent election results or tune into the local news and look at the rhetoric used and accepted, you might have a different opinion. We're losing our grip on limited government, free markets, individualism, and local community. Young millennials, California immigrants, and other highly educated people are infusing leftist language into the popular vernacular, such as social justice, economic equality, net neutrality, and other seemingly innocuous words like the likes of better work nearly bested the thoroughly conservative Ted Cruz with last year. We can't let capitalism and the free market be defined by association with cronyism and corporatism. And we can't let justice be perverted into social justice. We have to maintain objective definitions and claim pure systems of free market, due process, and limited government that we know promote prosperity. Teaching young people these things may be the only way to prevent a new generation from changing the political landscape through ignorant idealism and good intentions. Quickly, things to correct post-haste. Property taxes, obviously. And in some ways, taxes are some of the best and the worst features of Texas right now. California is interesting on both ends of the corporate and the property tax issue, having some of the worst income tax policies in the country, but they actually have done a whole lot of reform on their property taxes over the past few decades. In the reverse, Texas, as we talked about, prudently avoids the income tax, but burdens its residents with high property taxes. One reason that California can afford good property taxes is they collect high revenue from income and other taxes, but Texas doesn't have that same type of system. Property taxes can quickly lead to housing affordability issues, and like the income tax, flips the Republican relationship between states and citizens. A consumption tax, however it's crafted, is more efficient and equitable than any other and should be given more thought. But the simplest way to reduce property tax burdens might be by streamlining state expenditures and reducing spending. Another area for reform is the corporate tax policy. Even with low taxes and lower taxes in California, Texas has relatively unstable and inequitable corporate taxes, with our margin tax, which is very different from the system that California uses, and inflict different burdens on different business owners, even with those losing money facing further tax burdens. Certainly don't want us to embrace a California-style tax level, but a predictable and stable tax framework would be more favorable. Flattening corporate taxes for consistency and keeping them low or exempted is the best way to keep Texas at the top of the business-friendly hierarchy. On other issues like tort reform, healthcare, education policy, they're important for the future. And all these, we can continue to look to California for examples on what not to do. We should also look around the nation for other things that work well. Finally, and this might seem like a minor point, but I think it's important. One way that we're outclassing California is while serving the least privileged among us involves homelessness. The ever-growing crisis in California is being handled well by the free market here in Texas for the most part. Just up the road in Fort Worth, the Presbyterian Night Shelter runs the Clean Slate program that employs homeless Texans to lift them up through hard work and responsibility rather than handouts. It's not a government program, nor is it reliant on government funds. With more of this and less centralized control and spending like California, we can keep marching on the path to ever greater prosperity and instill personal responsibility and charity in the next generation. After all, what is a Texan spirit without such virtues and values as self-reliance combined with service to others with the gifts and the talents you have next? We know the demographics are changing in Texas, and they're going to keep changing. We know more Californians are going to move here, and our cities are going to continue to sprawl outward. We don't have much to say in these matters, but we do have a say in how they impact Texas. We want to welcome newcomers from any place, but we want to assimilate them into the Texas political and economic culture. That means teaching individualism, responsibility, charity, and community by being involved in our local communities. More than this, we have to remain steadfast that our solutions work across all demographics, locations, and areas. We can have conservative, booming urban hubs operating in fiscally responsible models and with cooperative and collaborative communities rather than municipal, county, or state control. We need to keep one eye on domestic matters and another on California and other states to keep ourselves from running down familiar, mistaken pathways. Maintaining low and consistent taxes, promoting energy exploration, and turning our attention to our cities is the best way to serve Texans and increase prosperity and economic opportunity for those here and those hoping to move. All right, that's it. You guys have any questions? You typically do a Q&A type?
Yes, and David.
4 hours.
4 hours. Well, thanks for coming out. It's I guess you guys have been around here in Collin County for about 52 years?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I was joking before that, I mean, 52 years ago, all the Republicans in Texas might have been able to fit in this room. I think you saw there that I was born and raised in Midland, Texas, and my grandmother was yellow dog Democrat. She basically, I mean, she lived into her 80s, and she basically didn't have any other president, as far as she was concerned, after FDR. State changes. States change, and it can definitely change again. I think it's incumbent on us not to get too complacent or lazy with regards to that, just because we are Texas. Any questions?
Yeah.
I understand we have, yeah. Go ahead.
Clearly, you know, based on their topic, we were talking about California kind of infesting Texas. But what about from our southern border, and the demographics are clearly changing from the migration, if you will, from Central America to Texas, and at some point in time, we're going to be a minority.
We are.
Well, who do you mean by we?
Pardon me?
Who do you mean by we?
We, Caucasian.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, but I suppose so. I mean, to your larger point.
I'm thinking about, because apparently a lot of those people are also of Democrat persuasion.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose so, and that's certainly a concern, and I think that everybody in this room probably supports efforts to get a control on what's going on in the border. You know, I will say that Hispanics should be natural constituents for the GOP. And there's a certain rhetoric, you know, within the Republican Party and with the conservative movement as a whole, that sometimes I wonder if they're doing everything they can to make sure that these people don't become Republicans. Incredibly hardworking, entrepreneurial, family-focused, and religious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's certainly true, demographic changes, but demography isn't destiny. And actually, I think the California example there is something that we should learn from. There was a certain strain of the California Republican Party in the 1990s. I'm not saying they were bad people or anything like that, but they really did, through their rhetoric, through some legislation that was proposed, do everything they could to make sure that Hispanics within California would never vote Republican in the rest of their life, and that got passed on to their kids. I mean, that's a huge part, that's a huge story of why, again, the state of Ronald Reagan, you know, I think that actually California voted for Republicans up through 1988, actually. I'm pretty sure that George.
Pete Wilson.
What was that?
Up through Pete Wilson.
Up through Pete Wilson,
Yeah,
that's
he
what
was
I
the
was
last
talking
Republican
about.
governor.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's certainly something that we need to keep our eye on, but I will say that Texas has done a better job than a lot of states. I mean,
So we do
should
have an
never-
outreach, a Texas outreach program for this.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, we are not now, nor have we ever been purely a state of one race or anything like that. I mean, it's been incorporated into this culture and into our economy and into our government for a long time. And I think we have a lot to teach the rest of the country about that, actually.
Have you seen any, or are you aware of any research that shows registrations for folks that are moving into Texas? Because we're just talking about, well, what percentage of folks that are coming in bring values that reject where they came from, as opposed to, you know, they don't know any better, they just.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the data right now.
Seeking asylum.
Yeah, is there anybody doing research for registration?
Yeah, I think a lot of the data right now is all over the place. There's certainly the dynamic that we sort of have a hunch is going on, which is that people move into the state to escape blue state policies, but then keep voting for blue state policies. And that's certainly happening to an extent. But first of all, we don't have all that much data because elections are fairly rare, and a lot of them are low turnout affairs, and it's not a static situation. The population for the election in 2018 is different from the population in 12, for instance. So, as I said, there is data to support the typical story that we tell. However, there's also other data that says a lot of what happened in 2018, for instance, with the Beto race, actually involved a lot more local native Texans than we might actually feel comfortable with. It's easy to tell ourselves a story about just outsiders, whether from California or somewhere else, flipping the state. And like I said, that certainly happens. What I think the conservative movement, the GOP, needs to focus on is appealing to those Hispanic communities we were talking about, figuring out a way to talk to them, but also young people that are increasingly seeing the party as toxic.
Could you talk a little bit about your policy institute?
Yeah.
How many people you have, how many full-time, how many part-time?
Yeah.
How you're funded?
Yeah, so right now, I think we have 5 scholars right now. They're all working part-time. We've got relationships with the Atlas Institute up in New York. We also have some part-time scholars from the Manhattan Institute, a gentleman named Michael Hendricks. In terms of funding, it's a lot of individual donations right now. We did just receive, I'm sure this is public, we just received a pretty big grant from the Charles Koch Institute. So we're going to have 3 full-time researchers starting with us this summer, researching. I think we settled on municipal bond issues in Texas' largest cities, ease of doing business in Texas' largest cities, and potentially some criminal justice reform issues. So like I said, we have a city focus, but very much was founded with an idea on the changing nature of the state. Sort of a desire to speak to populations that typically don't get our message.
And where are you, when you headquartered? Denton, where is it?
Dallas, actually, on J Highway. Dallas. I live in Fort Worth.
Okay.
But yeah, we're based in Dallas.
Oh, that is.
Speaking of criminal justice reform, what do you think of the new Dallas County DA's policy?
With regards to like the
$750.
yeah.
Not prosecuting any thefts, where the value of property stolen is $750 or less.
Yeah.
And this kind of opening the door to rapid crime.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that. Are there any ADAs or DAs in the room right now, actually? Okay. I'm married to an ADA. And I think that actually a lot of people don't realize just how powerful and how important DAs are. And a lot of times the DA's races don't really get the sort of public debate or interest that other debates do, but they're incredibly important members of our system. For most Texans, the most important person in the criminal justice system, suppose aside from a local policeman, would be the district attorney. Yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. I do think that it certainly has a potential to lead to all sorts of rampant corruption. But I will say that whenever the right, or conservatives, or Republicans, whatever you want to say it, whenever they're a non-factor in local politics, and the only real competition is between who can be the left and the far left, you get a lot of weird squirrely dynamics that happen like this. And yeah, and I think that the Dallas GOP had a real opportunity a few years ago with Susan Hoff, is that her name? It's just a tragic situation that just set up some of this craziness that we're seeing right now.
Do you have any insight into the concept of partisan versus non-partisan local elections? Like here in Plano, Coffee County is where Democrats get elected. You get top conservative and non-partisan mates elected.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, we have a similar type thing in Fort Worth where it's really a non-partisan race, but for all intents and purposes, it's a partisan race.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize that Texas, as red as we are, there's only one city in Texas, one large city in Texas that consistently elects Republican mayors, and that's Fort Worth, and that might be changing. If you think about it, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, Austin, pretty consistently elect Democrats to varying degrees of progressivism. And, I mean, Tarrant County is also the county of, Beto O'Rourke won it. And then also, who's I'm sorry, the abortion state senator, how quickly we forget.
Debbie, what's
Calling all road.
No, the woman from the years back.
Oh,
Mindy
Mindy
Davis.
Davis.
Okay. So, I live in Fort Worth. I'm particularly concerned about Fort Worth. I think that, yeah, I think that that's absolutely something that happens, because the thing about these local elections is that the local elections aren't just important for the issues at stake, they also build party benches. And so a lot of times conservatives don't pay as much attention to local races, whether they're officially partisan or not. And that's when people can get into office, I mean, Beto O'Rourke, how did he start out his political career?
City.
He's the El Paso City Council, right? And yeah, I do think that there's concern about that because it is nonpartisan and because conservatives frankly aren't as concerned about that as they are with more high-profile races. That's when you can start to develop a resume, build a team, all of that, and that can cause problems down the road. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yeah, so how can we change that? Would that take a Texas Constitution? How would that, how could we?
Yeah, I don't think it would take the Texas Constitution. I'm actually not sure. Surely that's something that left up to the cities and localities and the counties, but I'm really not sure. I mean, I'm open to a conversation. So you think that if they were officially Democrat and Republican races, that might actually clarify
I don't
things?
think so. Nope.
Other cities.
Or at least good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. There's a lot of talk. A lot of people like to sound sort of self-righteous, and they say like, "Oh, I don't vote the party. I just vote. I just vote for the individuals." And that's good as far as it goes. But for the most part, if somebody has an R after their name, that probably means that they believe certain things, and everybody's too busy to know everything about everybody. So, yeah, I think that might be a good idea.
I think we have a problem in the Republican Party in that we don't have a voice. The news media, the local newspaper, the whole thing all spouts the Democrat program, and the Republicans don't have really any way to communicate with the population.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean,
I think one thing that we all need to do is we have contact with a lot of folks, and us do the promotion to everybody we know about what's happening in the United States.
yeah, and that's actually something that I think LSPI, the Lone Star Policy Institute, has ambitions for. Not to be officially a newspaper or news outlet or anything like that, but something that can maybe put a spotlight on local issues that are often overlooked, the way you would hope that a balanced newspaper would do. Newspaper business is hard. Media business is.
I tell my Democrat friends, the best argument I got is listen to the Democrat candidates for president.
Yeah, Democratic Party is going through pretty crazy stuff right now. Certainly not my grandmother's party anymore. Anything else?
Okay, go ahead.
Do you have any hope for, or let me rephrase that, what are your hopes for the Texas legislature addressing the tax problem?
So I think
You
if
mentioned the consumption tax, which
Yeah.
I would agree with, but didn't they try kicking a sales tax increase to balance out the property tax, and that got thwarted? Am I right? I don't
Pretty
recall.
soon, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, to be honest, I think that is some sort of swap along those lines is probably the long-term solution to this. And it's going to take a lot of politicking because it is a fairly dramatic change to happen as well. Some of the property taxes being replaced by consumption tax or a sales tax. In terms of my optimism, I think about a month ago, maybe about 6 weeks ago, I really thought that the groundswell of people being so upset about their property taxes would sort of push the legislature into sort of knocking heads together to get something done on this. But I haven't really followed it the past week or so, but it seems like nothing's going to come out of this.
But don't those same people that interrupt when you talk about increasing the sales tax?
What was that?
Don't those same people that are all up in arms about property tax, then erupt when you talk about balancing it with an increase in another tax, and
Yeah.
making it possible for the legislators to do their job.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing about property taxes is so complex in the state is that taxes are really tied up with all sorts of other things whenever it comes to Texas. Property taxes are. Because whenever you talk about property taxes in the state, you're talking about funding the local school. And when you talk about funding the local school, there are sort of two strange streams that go into that. Most of it coming from the local property taxpayers, but there's also a significant part that comes in from the state. And so it's this sort of Rube Goldberg contraption where you try to mess with one part of it or correct one problem, and all of a sudden you have local school officials or local government officials who are worried about not getting enough money for the population growth that they're seeing. You know, on this issue, I will say, I've written some things in the past about this, is that if Republicans don't figure out how to make some sort of, I think, this swap happen, it's not unheard of. There are no permanent victories in politics. It's not unheard of for a Democrat to make a pretty persuasive case for a state income tax. They could say, look at your property tax bill. This is a tax on working people. You're just trying to have a good household, or a stable household, pay your bills and whatnot. Why not institute an income tax on, not everybody, of course, that's the way it always starts, just the richest Texans, the top 1%, or the 1% of the 1%. If we can do that, that'll lead to X% off the average property tax bill. Sounds crazy in this sort of room when we talk about instituting an income tax in Texas, but you can see that sort of narrative taking hold if we have this sort of status quo over property taxes over another decade that we've had for the past decade. And that's the way it starts. And I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody in this room that's how income taxes always start. It's not for everybody else. It's just for the richest.
Yeah.
And pretty soon, you're in a situation like New York City, actually, where 13% for New York State. And once everything's settled, literally over half your income is going to the state. So.
I feel it was the wrong time for Texas to propose a consumption sales tax right now with it, when we're running like a $10 billion surplus. And I think what the issue is, they should have used some of that surplus to reduce the property tax, and then subsequently after that's done, maybe you could do some kind of a swap. But to do a swap with having this whopping surplus of gigantic proportions and not using it to reduce the property tax, I think that's created a logjam.
Absolutely, and I mean, there's another dynamic here, which is, you know, a larger one that I think conservatives should keep their eye on, which is a cost of living agenda, and what we can do to bring down the house of pricing. This is the price of housing. And this is a real touchy subject in suburbs. I'm sure I know it's an issue in Plano. It's certainly an issue in Keller where I live. Whenever you take steps to reduce the supply of housing, you drive up the cost of housing. You make it more difficult for working people to live. That's going to lead, I think, to some political dynamics that we're not going to like in the future, for instance. Some wag put it this way. It's actually my friend Michael Hendricks, who works at the Manhattan Institute and also works with us, talking about the Beto signs that we saw everywhere last year. And a lot of Republicans were focused on the lawn sign problem. But really, what we should be thinking about is, do enough working people have lawns in the first place? Are we instituting policies so it's easier to build housing? We're not regulating it too hard. I think that our suburbs have got to find some way to find some happy medium, have some sort of low-cost housing that can be built, or high-density housing that can be built, not everywhere, to sort of ease the pressure on a lot of the housing prices that we're seeing in Dallas-Fort Worth.
Well, here in Texas, I mean, in Plano, the word high-density housing has created kind of an uproar. And from what I'm told, because of the price of the land is really so expensive, it's only profitable for a developer to build a 5 or 10-story building, and then the rent that they have to charge for those things is not going to serve the people at the lower end of the income scale, and that is, the battle seems to be going on about increased demand for utilities and traffic and schooling, and the number that I've heard here in Plano is that Plano was built for 270,000 people, and there's 286,000 right now.
Yeah.
It's a big mess.
I will say that housing prices in sort of the triangle I was talking about Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston have started to rise above the national level housing prices for the first time in a long time.
Well, there's one solution for the whole thing. We don't have any water, it all stop. So let's just don't build any more dams, right? Mr. Wood.
Damn.
Thank you very much. Now, just for conversation, you were in the U.S. Marines?
I was.
And what, two terms?
2 tours, yeah, Afghanistan, yeah.
All right. How long were you over there?
As an infantry officer, the deployments were 7 months each, but the second one got cut short because I got shot.
Okay. That's all right. But thank you for serving our country. Okay, young man, very much.
Thank you.
All right.
North Carolina, Camp Michigan.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Go
you
ahead,
very
sir.
much.
I'll go this way.
Okay, yeah.
There we go.
It's a great story.
This one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. There you go. All right. Everybody got a ticket for the Wheel of Fortune? You got the winning ticket? Who had the winning ticket last month? I don't have a ticket. Steve, I need a ticket.
I can take care of that. Anybody else?
While we're getting the tickets, we have some elected officials and candidates. So if you will, all come over this way. Mike and Gary, Judge. Do a little profile. Who else do we have? Thank you, sir.
How are you doing?
Culture.
Bart, why don't you come? Okay, Gary, you ready to come on up, Gary? And what are you famous for, Gary?
Old constable. I'm Gary Edwards. I'm your constable on the east side of Collins County, Precinct 2. I've got over 40 years of experience as a constable, a deputy constable, and I'm excited. I love this job, and that's the reason I come to work every day. I retired from Dallas in 2006 after 32 years, and hated retirement. I loved constabling, and Joe Barton and Terry Douglas hired me back in 2007, and Joe passed away in 2015, and I was appointed by Commissioner's Court because of my experience to take his place. And I ran unopposed 4 years ago, and I hope to do so again this March and November. Thank you.
Gary, one moment.
Yes, sir.
You've been serving as a constable for how many years?
I was hired as a deputy on April Fool's Day, 1975 in downtown Dallas.
All right.
And
You're not under the sheriff. You're
I'm my own department.
own department, and the Commissioner's Court approves your budget.
That's correct.
Okay, but you're under your own authority.
That's correct.
Okay.
In my case, the Commissioner's Court not only approved my budget, but they also selected Commissioner Webb's on it. Selected me.
All right. And coming back, what is your staff? How many people do you have?
I have 6 officers and 1 clerk.
That's what I wanted. And y'all are serving papers.
We serve papers and felony warrants, felony free, state jail for all the misdemeanor A, B, and C.
And I'm leading to one other question.
Okay.
With all the impact that we hear on the border, do we have a problem with illegals here in Collin County? Is that under your umbrella, or is that?
Well, I'm sure with illegals would be more along the lines of all the traffic tickets that they generate, or all the, our doings with them are that they don't have a Texas driver's license, and they're not insured. And so whenever the troopers, or my deputies, or constable deputy, or sheriff deputy write them a ticket, it's for all those things that responsible Texas drivers should have, and they don't.
Now, one more clarification. When you said the east side, you're talking about Wiley, you're talking about?
From Saxe over to Murphy, I've got the northern part of Saxe, and just a tinge of Murphy, all the way up across and all the way around the lake to include Branch and Princeton up to Blue Ridge.
Pretty good bit.
Royce City, Levant, Farmersville. That's where my office is until this time next year. And we're building a new building in Levant at 78 and 205.
All right. What is your budget when you say that? What do you have?
I've got a $500,000 budget.
Okay.
About 540,000.
Well, thank you for your service. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, folks. My name's Mike Vance. I run for the Constable's Office, Precinct 1, Collin County. That covers Fairview, McKean, Melissa, Allen, Westminster, some of New Hope, and some of Weston. I'm a 34-and-a-half-year law enforcement veteran, also been with the Collin County Sheriff's Office. I'm going to retire September 30th this year, and allow me to run full-time on the campaign. I'd like to get y'all to vote, get me in there so I can serve at least 12 more years serving the citizens of Collin County.
Well, just one thing to clarify. Did I hear you say you worked for Sheriff Box for 30+ years?
32 for Sheriff Box and 1.5.
And he kept you around all those times?
Well, don't bring that up.
Okay. You must be pretty good, huh?
I'm fooling.
Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Which one of you fellas covers Lowry Crossing? I hadn't heard that come up yet.
That's not mine. That's going to be probably Sammy Knapp.
Well, you want somebody served out here?
I can get it done for you.
That's what I want to hear.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Judge, this gentleman coming up is one of the outstanding jurists in Collin County. And Judge, how many years have you been on the bench?
County and district, 22.5.
22.5 years. You've seen a lot of growth, a lot of situations. Right.
I got here in '84 and as an assistant DA. Graduated and went to law school at night. Graduated in December of '83, took the February bar, started up here at the end of May. At the end of this month, I will have been in the service of this county and these people for 35 years.
Fantastic. All right. For the record, who's the lady sitting over there? What's her relationship?
That would be my second mother. That's how my kids refer to Kay Bear.
She's your political strategist?
Kay has been my campaign manager since 1995, when I ran for the newly created County Court of Law number 4. And that was as races go, an entertaining. It was a rolling fist fight from one end of the county to the other. Kay was my campaign manager. I was younger and had a little more adrenaline, and more than once she said, "Sit down, just don't respond." There's one or two times when some guys said some rather untruthful and incendiary things in letters to the editor. I'm about to rip the door off the hinges going out the front door to go hit somebody in the nose. Cooler heads prevailed. I didn't go out the door. After the race, more than one of those guys said, "You know, we thought you would react to that."
Okay.
Kay has, no, I'm just trying to think, how many, yeah. Kay, her husband Tom, while he was alive, were very, very interested in putting good people on the bench. I taunt them, but they put an awful lot of other good people. They
I need to
put-
tell them what I used to tell you. You could beat the rug, but you couldn't beat your wife.
That's true.
Make them mad.
Judge, we thank you for your years of service.
Thank you.
Very much. One more thing on business, and then we'll do the Wheel of Fortune. Young lady, you going to be our spinner wheel for us this evening? Okay? Now, what's the big deal that's coming up? It's the 4th of July parade. What we just say, that's will be a 22nd year of handing out flags. We'll hand out from 15 to 20,000 flags, and so we're going to need a chairman. I'm looking over to my right, a chairman for the parade this year, and we're going to need a lot of workers. And Judge Payton is not around to give us 20 or 30 kids to hand out the flags. So we're going to have a lot of seniors, okay, handing out flags this year. So let's talk. Let me know how you can help and intentions here. All right, everybody got their ticket? Okay. Now we want to spin first, right? So we know what the prize is. All right. So let's spin. Hold on to the bottom too, in case you. All right. Spin it good. Let me get the list. Okay, Vanna, what is it?
11 money.
It's either 9 or 11.
What is it?
Which is
11.
11?
That's
11?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. It is 11. It is 11. Come here. Go ahead and bankruptcy. No winner tonight. Bankruptcy. Reality. Welcome to reality. Thank you. All right. One other last thing a minute.
You're right, I want
David?
bankruptcy.
David, are you gonna make a request here? Did you review this situation?
I have not reviewed anything.
Okay.
I didn't know I was supposed to right away.
Wait, come up and tell me. Come on up here, young man. All right. Got a request for volunteers. The Baptist College is having
They're hosting.
they're hosting a North Texas debate.
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's homeschool, and they have their debate competition, and it's Dallas Baptist University is sponsoring it down here in Mountain Creek Lake, and they need judges. No experience required. Some of the judging, like for the debate, they do debates and speeches. The debates are like Lincoln Douglas style debates, and one called team policy. I don't know what the policy is. It'll be some kind of controversial policy.
All right, now let me help you here in the interest of time. We're going to put your information on our website, CCRMC. Right? So if you're interested in becoming participate in debate, a judge in the debate, go to our website, his information, contact him, and then arrange it to go and be helpful. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Anything under the good of the order as we close? Now, David, you want to tell us next month who our speaker is?
We are going to have a very esteemed speaker.
Stand up if you're going to talk to our crowd, please.
We are going to have Dr. Tom Goodman, who is the president of the Goodman Institute. He has been on the forefront of healthcare policy, more accurately, I should say, health insurance policy, which is exactly what they've done to us, Richard. I've had this discussion with you before. Even I, who know this, don't say health insurance. I say health care. It's all one thing now. They messed us up on that.
Yeah.
But Goodman has been on the forefront of this issue for decades. And he is very much in tune with what the Trump administration has done, is doing, and is going to do. And that'll be a very interesting meeting.
Okay. Any other comments on good of the order? Anybody needs anything? Thank you for your attendance very much. And we'll see you next month. Okay? Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.